I heard the words before I even saw his face. "She's just a security guard," my father said, his voice carrying across the polished ballroom like a champagne cork popping. Then came the sound that would replay in my head for the rest of the night. "Holy shit, she's on the news." I turned. A dozen heads swiveled. My father, mid-sip, sprayed champagne in a glittering arc straight into the face of the guest sitting beside him. The poor man blinked through the shower of bubbles while half the table gasped and the other half laughed. For one strange still moment, I thought, well, that's one way to start a wedding reception. The string quartet kept playing as if nothing had happened. But my stomach was tightening in that slow, deliberate way it always did when I was cornered. I could already hear the questions forming in people's minds. Why is she on the news? What did she do? If you told me a week ago that my father's champagne would become a weapon of mass embarrassment, I would have laughed. But life has a way of setting its own stages, and mine had been building toward this night for years. I had arrived just 20 minutes earlier, slipping through the side entrance of the Grand Marlowe Hotel's main hall. It was the kind of place with gilded columns and crystal chandeliers, the kind my father loved to brag about hosting events in. My younger sister's wedding had been in the works for over a year, and the guest list was a roll call of local notables, judges, city officials, lawyers. And me, the eldest daughter. The one with no law degree, no country club membership, and according to Dad, no ambition beyond guarding doors for a living. I'd caught his words while walking past the open double doors that led into the reception. He was seated at a table near the center, a cluster of guests leaning in as he spun a story. I could tell by the tilt of his head and the way he cradled his glass that he was in performance mode. "She's just a security guard," he'd said with that little chuckle of his. Like it was some cute flaw of mine worth mentioning for the sake of a laugh. The thing is, I didn't flinch anymore when he said things like that. I'd learned over time to let them land like rain on a jacket surface level, nothing soaking in. What I didn't expect was the voice a groomsman maybe, or one of the cousins, from out of state shouting loud enough to silence the nearest tables. "Holy shit, she's on the news." And just like that, the entire room shifted. Heads turned toward the television over the bar. The champagne flew. My father's perfect social posture crumbled one sparkling droplet at a time. I stood at the threshold half in shadow, wondering if this was my cue to walk in or my chance to slip away. Either way, I knew the story was about to come out, the one nobody in this room had bothered to ask me about all week. And it had started not here in this room full of white tablecloths and polite applause, but 7 days earlier, in a very different kind of hall. 7 days earlier, I was in a hallway that smelled like burnt coffee and old tile wax, not roses and champagne. My boots squeaked against the polished linoleum of the Jefferson Federal Building, a monolithic slab of 1970s architecture that looked like it had been designed to survive an airstrike. I'd been with the Metro Transit Authority's security division for almost 5 years. People heard security guard and pictured someone half asleep in a folding chair holding a flashlight. That's not my reality. Our division works under contract with multiple city agencies, and sometimes when you've built a certain reputation, you get called into places that require more than checking ID badges. That Monday morning had been routine rotate through the lobby monitor. The cameras deal with the occasional "I forgot my pass" situation. At 10:17 a.m., everything shifted. A man in a navy jacket walked through the east entrance, bypassing the security desk like he owned the place. He carried a duffel bag that sagged like it was filled with bricks. Something about his gait, the way his eyes flicked to the exit signs, made my stomach tighten. I've learned to trust that feeling. "Sir, can I see your badge?" I called. He didn't even slow down. I radioed for backup, but instinct told me there was no time to wait. My training, not just from the MTA, but from the 10 years I'd spent in the Army, kicked in. I followed. Most people at the wedding knew I'd been in the service, but they didn't know the details. My father had told them I never amounted to much in the military, either because I left as a staff sergeant instead of climbing higher. He never mentioned the deployments, the medals, the night in Helmand Province when I pulled 2 soldiers out of a burning vehicle under enemy fire. Not that I'd expect him to. In my family, prestige came from titles and networks, not scars and service. Dad had been a trial attorney for 30 years. He wore his reputation like a tailored suit, crisp, impressive, but only comfortable for him. My mother came from a family of social climbers who measured worth by the size of your house and the exclusivity of your guest list. From the time I was a teenager, I was the different one. While my younger sister went to cotillion classes, I was sneaking library books about counterterrorism and running obstacle courses in the park. My decision to enlist at 19 was the first time I saw Dad's face actually flush with anger. He didn't yell. He just said, "That's beneath you," and walked out of the room. I think part of him never forgave me for not fitting into the picture he'd painted for our family. Every holiday, every family event, the digs would come, subtle smiling, but sharp enough to stick. "Your cousin's at Yale Law now. You still guarding bus stations." The truth is, I liked my work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And it mattered. And sometimes, like that Monday morning, it meant being exactly where I needed to be when the wrong person walked in. The man with the duffel turned down a side corridor. My eyes caught a glint of something metallic through the half-open zipper. I picked up my pace. "Sir, I need you to stop," I said again this time, with a command voice that had made 20-year-old privates snap to attention overseas. He turned just enough for me to see his face, pale, sweating eyes wide like a cornered animal. Then he bolted. I sprinted after him, closing the distance. The duffel swung wildly. Somewhere behind me, I heard the pounding of another guard's boots, but I was already reaching. I grabbed his arm, twisted, and felt the bag slip from his grasp. It hit the floor with a dull, ominous thud. That's when he shouted, "You don't understand, it's going to blow." My training screamed distance, but my instincts and the sight of people still walking in the corridor ahead screamed contain. I kicked the bag away from him, dropped him with a shoulder pin, and barked into my radio. "Evacuate this floor now." Within minutes, the bomb squad was swarming the hall. Later, they'd confirmed the bag contained homemade explosives enough to kill dozens. And the man, well, let's just say his story was still unfolding in an interrogation room somewhere. I didn't tell my family any of this. Not because I was hiding it, but because I knew exactly how it would land at the dinner table. A polite, from my mother. A distracted nod from Dad, followed by a change of subject to my sister's wedding seating chart. So I went back to my life, back to my apartment, back to my post. I figured the moment had passed and that whatever small ripples my actions had caused would vanish into the city's endless churn of news. I didn't know that a single unblurred photo from that morning would find its way into the hands of a persistent local reporter. And I didn't know that photo would air unannounced on a giant flat screen above the Grand Marlowe Hotel's reception bar with my father standing directly beneath it. By the time the official report came out, the details had been sanitized within an inch of their lives. The public heard, a suspicious package was discovered at the Jefferson Federal Building. A security officer detained the suspect until authorities arrived. No mention of the chase, no mention of the threat to blow the place sky high. Certainly no mention of me by name. It's funny people think heroism always comes with headlines, but most of the time it comes with paperwork. I signed a non-disclosure agreement before I left the scene. The FBI agents thanked me with professional nods, the kind that said good job without actually saying it. I went home, reheated leftovers, and fed my cat. The next day, the city hummed along like nothing had happened. That suited me fine. I've never been one for the spotlight. But there was one loose thread, a young woman from the local news station who'd been staking out the federal building all morning. She'd been shooed back by the bomb squad, but not before her camera had caught a clear shot of me escorting the suspect out in handcuffs. The security footage released to the press later was blurred as per protocol, but this woman, she had the unblurred version, and she had a keen sense for stories that should be told. She called the MTA's public affairs office. They stonewalled her. She called again. Eventually, she got me on the phone. "I know you can't give details," she said, "but I'd like to do a piece on everyday heroes in our city. No sensationalism, just the truth." I almost said no. The safest play was to let the moment pass. but something in her tone, respectful, not pushy, made me pause. I agreed to meet her for coffee off the record. We sat in a quiet cafe 2 blocks from my apartment. She didn't even take out her recorder until I said it was okay. I told her about my Army years, my work with the MTA, how quick thinking and training had guided my actions. I left out anything operational. She listened like it mattered. When she asked for a photo, I hesitated. Just for context, she promised. I gave her one in uniform taken at the Transit Authority headquarters. A week went by. I heard nothing. Then the morning of my sister's wedding, I woke to a voicemail from her. "They're running the piece tonight. 6 o'clock. You might want to watch." I didn't plan to. Weddings and TV news didn't mix. And besides, I knew my father wouldn't exactly turn up the volume for one of my interviews. By noon, I was slipping into a modest navy dress and pulling my hair into a low bun. The ceremony was at a historic chapel across town, the reception at the Grand Marlowe Hotel, all marble and crystal and gold leaf. The kind of place where the champagne had its own waitstaff. When I walked into the ballroom later that evening, the scene looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine. My sister was radiant in her gown. Dad was in his element, glad handing city council members and toasting the groom's parents. That's when I heard it, his voice rich with self-satisfaction. "She's just a security guard." It landed like a slap I'd been expecting for years. I kept moving, pretending not to notice. If he wanted to turn me into a punchline for strangers, let him. But fate, as it turns out, has a wicked sense of timing. Somewhere across the room, the bar's big flat-screen TV flickered from sports highlights to the evening news. The volume was low, but the caption at the bottom was impossible to miss. "Local security officer prevents federal building tragedy." Then my face filled the screen, not blurred, not cropped, but crystal clear. The interview clip rolled me in uniform, talking calmly to the reporter over coffee. A man near the bar did a double take, then shouted over the music, "Holy shit, she's on the news!" I turned in time to see my father, mid-sip of champagne, snap his head toward the TV. The shock must have hit, just as the bubbles reached his throat, because the next instant, he sprayed a glittering mist of champagne right into the face of the woman sitting beside him. The woman gasped. The table erupted. My father coughed, dabbed at his mouth, then glanced around to see who else had noticed. "Answer, everyone!" Phones were out. Guests were whispering. And for the first time in my life, I saw my father completely off balance in a room full of people he'd been trying to impress. And all I had to do was stand there. It's strange watching a room turn on a dime. 1 second, the reception was all clinking glasses and soft jazz from the quartet in the corner. The next, there was a hush undercut by whispers as guests nudged each other and pointed toward the television over the bar. I stayed where I was, half hidden by one of the marble columns. On the screen, my interview played out in neat sound bites, the reporter's voiceover describing the incident, my photo in uniform filling the frame. The words "heroic security officer" crawled across the bottom. I could feel the shift ripple through the room. The aunt who'd barely acknowledged me earlier now stared like she was seeing me for the first time. A groomsman's jaw went slack. Even the DJ paused mid-scroll through his playlist. The TV cut back to the anchor at the news desk. She wrapped up the segment with "Angie." And while her name wasn't released initially, we're proud to recognize her tonight for quick action that may have saved dozens of lives. Back to you, Tom. When the music returned through the ballroom, speakers, it sounded different. Like the notes had picked up the weight of what just happened. My father was still blotting champagne off his tux jacket. His eyes darted between the TV and me. He looked like he was trying to solve a math problem that kept changing variables. I decided to spare him the trouble and walked toward my table. My assigned seat was in the back corner, right next to the kitchen entrance, a classic family move. The bride and groom's table naturally was front and center, flanked by my parents and the groom's family. I could feel the low murmur of voices following me as I sat down. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was clarifying. A middle-aged man in a navy suit leaned over from the next table. "That was you. On the news." I nodded. "You work for the MTA, right?" he asked. "Heard about that incident. My niece takes the train downtown every day. Guess I owe you one." Just doing my job, I said, and meant it. The server came by to refill my water. As she set down the pitcher, she gave me a quick smile. I saw that clip last week, she whispered. Knew it had to be you. Glad they gave you credit. I thanked her, wondering if I was the only one in the room who noticed the way my father's shoulders stiffened at the sound of other people praising me. He was making his way around the tables now, champagne flute in hand, laughing too loudly at whatever the guests were saying. I recognized the move control the conversation before someone else defines it. He stopped at my table. There you are, he said as if I'd been hiding. Quite the surprise seeing you up there. I looked up at him evenly. Guess not all security work is just guarding doors, huh? For a second, I thought he might bite back, but instead he smiled the kind of politician smile that never reaches the eyes. Of course. Always knew you had it in you. I let him have the line. No point arguing in front of an audience. The rest of the evening moved in odd rhythms. People would approach me quietly, shake my hand, thank me for my service. My father would drift by, hovering just close enough to hear, but never staying long enough to hear my answers in full. The bride, my sister, broke away from a circle of bridesmaids to come find me. She hugged me tight. I can't believe you didn't tell me. You had enough on your plate, I said. Still. She pulled back, looking me in the eye. That's incredible. I'm proud of you. Something in her tone softened the knot in my chest. It had been a long time since anyone in my family had said that without a trace of irony. By the time dessert was served, the initial frenzy had died down, but the undercurrent was still there. People glanced my way more often than they looked at the floral centerpieces. And my father? He kept glancing too. Not with pride, not with anger exactly. More like a man who just realized he'd been playing the wrong game for years. I didn't know it yet, but the real turning point of the night was still ahead, and it wasn't going to happen on the dance floor. It started quietly. Somewhere between the last bite of cheesecake and the DJ's first attempt to get people on the dance floor, I noticed a ripple of movement near the bar. A few guests drifted over, eyes drawn upward. Then more followed until a small crowd had formed next, craning toward the big flat screen. The bartender, sensing an opportunity, turned the volume up a notch. The evening news was replaying my segment, not just a brief mention, but the full 2-minute piece. The footage showed me in uniform, my hand gripping the suspect's arm, leading him toward the bomb squad officers. The reporter's voice was calm, measured. Authorities confirmed the bag contained a functional explosive device. Quick action from security officer Danielle Porter prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life. I'd forgotten how direct my own voice sounded in the interview clip. We're trained to act fast, but you never do it alone. My team responded exactly the way they needed to. I'm just glad everyone went home safe. The camera cut back to the anchor, but by then, the crowd at the bar had grown. They weren't just watching the screen, they were looking at me. Someone, a young man in a gray suit I didn't recognize, broke the spell with a shout that carried across the room. Holy shit, she's on the news. Heads turned. The quartet stumbled to a halt mid-song. And there in the center of it all was my father, lifting his glass in mid-sip, eyes locked on the screen. He choked. The champagne burst from his mouth in a sparkling spray that caught the overhead lights, arcing straight into the face of the city treasurer's wife. The woman gasped, dabbing frantically at her silk dress. My father's face went red, then pale. Around them, a chorus of reactions, laughter, stifled coughs, sharp whispers rippled through the tables. I might have felt bad for him if the moment hadn't felt so poetic. Years of his public jabs all coming back in one fizzy, champagne-soaked instant. The groomsman who'd shouted walked toward me, grinning like he'd just discovered a celebrity in the wild. Is that really you? It's me, I said. Damn, he said, shaking his head. I thought you were like the coat check or something. Common mistake, I replied. By now, the DJ had caught on. He gestured toward the TV. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've got a local hero in the house tonight. The room erupted into applause. Not polite applause, either. This was the kind that starts strong and builds until even the waitstaff were clapping. I stayed seated, smiling, but not standing. I didn't need to bask in it. I just let the sound roll over me, watching my father out of the corner of my eye. He was trying to compose himself, dabbing at his mouth with a napkin, nodding stiffly to the people congratulating him on raising such a capable daughter. When the noise died down, my sister crossed the room, took my hand, and pulled me to my feet. "That's my sister," she told the guests nearest us. "She's the one who saved those people." There was another burst of applause. I gave a small wave, still keeping my voice even. I was just doing my job. But inside I could feel it, that subtle shift in the balance of power. For once, I wasn't the one in the corner avoiding my father's shadow. He was in mine. From that point on, the reception had a different current. People still danced and laughed, but there was an extra beat in their steps when they glanced my way. They weren't just seeing the security guard anymore. They were seeing the woman from the news, the one who'd stopped something awful before it started. And my father, he wasn't quite sure where to stand anymore. After the applause faded, the air in the ballroom felt altered. It wasn't that people were treating me like a celebrity. No one was asking for autographs, but the conversations around me had changed tone. They leaned in closer, listened longer, asked questions they might never have considered before. At the far end of the hall, the bride and groom shared their first dance. Guests circled the dance floor, phones raised, recording the moment. I stayed at my table sipping water, feeling oddly at ease. A man from the groom's side approached, tall with silver hair, in the easy manner of someone used to commanding a room. "Miss Porter," he said, "my son works at the federal building. You may have saved his life last week. I just wanted to say thank you." I nodded, warmth spreading through me in a way applause couldn't match. "I'm glad he's safe." Meanwhile, my father lingered near the bar, caught between groups, nodding distractedly as people spoke to him. His usual confidence was gone. The champagne incident had dented his armor, but it was the TV segment, the undeniable proof, that had cracked it. He finally made his way back toward me, glass refilled. "So," he said, hovering beside my chair, "you've been busy." "You could say that," I replied. He laughed lightly, like we were sharing a private joke. "You know, I always tell people you've got grit. Runs in the family." I looked up at him, steady. "Funny, I don't remember you telling me that." For a moment, his eyes flickered. Then he patted my shoulder and moved on as though the exchange had never happened. The bride came over again, bouquet in hand, cheeks flushed from dancing. "Danielle, you have to meet a few people." She pulled me toward a cluster near the head table. Among them was a local councilwoman who shook my hand and said, "If you're ever interested in a different kind of public service, call my office." I smiled politely. I wasn't looking for a new career, but it felt good to know the option existed. From behind me, I heard my father starting another conversation, his tone overly casual. "Well, she's always been tough. Grew up that way. You should have seen her as a teenager." Except this time, the guests didn't laugh. They glanced at me instead, measuring his words against what they'd just seen on TV. The old narrative wasn't sticking anymore. The dance floor filled again. I took a slow walk around the edge, soaking in the gold glow from the chandeliers, the smell of fresh flowers, the hum of voices. It struck me how different the room felt from when I'd first walked in. Back then, I was background. Now I was part of the story, and not the one my father had written for me. A young cousin darted over, phone in hand. "I sent your news video to all my friends," she said breathlessly. "They can't believe you're my cousin." I laughed. "Tell them I'm still just me." Near the end of the night, the bouquet toss and garter ceremony wrapped up. Guests began to trickle toward the exits. I stepped outside for a breath of cool air, the city lights reflecting off the hotel's glass facade. Behind me, the ballroom music dimmed, replaced by the muffled rumble of voices and clinking dishes being cleared. My father stepped out a moment later, scanning the sidewalk until his eyes found me. For a second, it looked like he might say something real, but instead, he adjusted his cufflinks, nodded once, and went back inside. And somehow, that was enough, because I realized I didn't need whatever half measure of approval he might offer. The respect I cared about was already mine, earned, not granted. What I didn't know yet was that the night still had one quiet twist left for me, waiting in the shadows beyond the hotel entrance. The valet stand was almost empty now, just two attendants in black vests leaning against the podium trading small talk. I gave them my ticket and stepped a little further from the door, where the hotel's floodlights gave way to the softer glow of the city street. That's when I heard the voice behind me. Danielle Porter. I turned. A man in a plain dark suit stood there, his hands in his pockets. He wasn't from the wedding, no boutonniere, no champagne flush in his cheeks. His stance was casual, but his eyes scanned like he was clocking every detail. "Yes," I said. He smiled faintly. "I think we have a mutual acquaintance. Special Agent Morales." The name clicked immediately, one of the FBI agents from the Jefferson Federal incident. She asked me to pass along her thanks. He continued, "And to tell you, there's an opening on a federal security detail. Discreet work, high stakes. We could use someone with your instincts." I blinked, the sounds of the wedding, the muffled bass, the bursts of laughter fading behind me. "You're offering me a job." "I'm offering you a conversation," he said. "One that might change the way you think about your future." Before I could answer, my car pulled up. The valet handed me the keys. The man in the suit gave a nod as if to say, "We'll talk when you're ready," then melted into the crowd spilling out from the corner bar. I slid into the driver's seat and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, watching the revolving doors of the Grand Marlowe spin. Through the glass, I saw my father laughing too loudly at something, champagne in hand. Again, his world still turning the way it always had. And I realized it didn't matter whether he ever truly saw me, because the right people already had. As I drove away, the city opened up ahead, street lamps casting long lines on the asphalt, the hum of traffic steady in the night air. My phone buzzed once in the passenger seat. A text from an unknown number. "We might have another assignment for you. Are you ready?" I stared at it, a slow smile spreading. Ready wasn't the right word. I'd been ready for years, my father just hadn't noticed. To the people at the wedding, I'd always been just a security guard. That night changed their story. But more importantly, it reminded me that the story I told myself mattered most. We don't always get to choose the rooms we walk into, but we do get to choose who we are when everyone finally turns to look. And if you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or written off by the people who should have believed in you, most remember this respect is earned in the moments no one's watching and revealed when the lights hit you without warning. So keep doing the work, keep standing your ground, because one day the truth will find its way to the screen, and the people who doubted you will be left holding the glass. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to share it with someone who needs the reminder that they are more than the labels others give them. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe and stay with me for the next one.